So I am Melanie Ochoa from ACLU SoCal, Southern California. I am one of the co-chairs. Unfortunately, if you remember, Brendan Woods was another co-chair for representing public defenders, and he had to step off of the board, unfortunately. And we do not yet, I don't believe, have a replacement for him. So before the end of this meeting, we will probably try to vote for another co-chair. But for now, you just stuck with me by myself. And I will pass it off to Professor Raphael.
Good morning, everyone. Steve Raphael. I'm the gubernatorial appointee and professor at the Goldman School, UC Berkeley.
Brian Kennedy. I'm a visitor today, and I pastor Mount Zion Church of Ontario here in Southern California.
And I did want to let you all know, for those of you who don't, because various folks have been on different subcommittee meetings, Tamani Taylor is going to be the replacement for Brendan Woods as a representative of the public defenders. And so she has been sworn in and oriented. She's the chief deputy public defender in Solano County. And she has joined two of the subcommittees. So she'll be at the Stop Data subcommittee meeting later this week, and then we'll also introduce her to the full board. But I did want to let you all know, for those of you who didn't know, that she has joined the board.
I'm sure glad to have her. Is there anyone else who is a board member that's currently on? I don't see, that's not on video.
Ronnie, I believe, has joined now.
Good morning, everybody.
Hi, Ronnie. Do you want to give a quick introduction?
Of course. Can you guys hear me? Hello, everybody. My name's Ronaldo Villeda, Executive Director of Hoops for Justice. Pronouns are he, his, him.
Okay, thank you. And Allison, is that all for now?
I believe so. We are still, we don't have, we need one more for a quorum. So we don't have quorum yet, but we will let you know. We're still trying to get in touch with everyone.
Awesome. Let's just go ahead and move forward then with the DOJ update, if someone's not too busy multitasking to handle that right now.
I can give the update. Thanks, everyone. Good morning. My name is Allison Elgart. I'm with the Attorney General's Office at DOJ. Welcome you all to the post subcommittee meeting. We're excited to have you all here. Basically, this meeting is to help you all decide the course of this next year's report, the 2023 report, looking at the data from 2021. And so we are, we just want to hear from all of you about what you're interested in working on and focusing on with this year's report. I think some of that will be determined by some of the updates and trainings that you've all been attending, and ties in with that. But this meeting is really a chance for those of you who have been involved in some of those trainings and update meetings to update the rest of the team, the rest of the subcommittee on those. And then, figure out by the end of the meeting what you're all interested in focusing on for this section of the report this next year. So last year, you all covered LD3, the principal policing training. You also looked at, various of the bias and supervisors trainings and some of the communications trainings. And so now we're interested in hearing from all of you about what you would like to cover in this next year's report. So that's really the purpose of this meeting. We'll also get updates from some of you, which is one of the reasons Pastor Kennedy is a guest at this meeting, but some of the meetings you've all attended from your from the board's work with Post. So I know Melanie will give an update on SB2 and an update on the ABA 46 regulations that you all, reviewed last year and made, provided feedback to Post on. So Melanie will give an update on what's going on with the ABA 46 regulations. Those were the ones on hiring and looking at, sorry, not hiring, but looking at bias in the recruitment of and evaluation of peace officer candidates. And so Melanie will give a report back on ABA 46 that you all sent a letter to Post about last year. And then some of you all have been involved in this Post Museum of Tolerance Racial Profiling Train the Trainer curriculum. So we'll also give an update on that. So, that's really the purpose of this meeting, is to give updates on everything that you've all been doing behind the scenes and some of the work that you all did. I also did want to let you know that there was a Post Commission meeting last week, and Andrea Guerrero represented the board at that meeting, and will give a report at the full board meeting. But the Post Commission did receive the recommendations that the board made to Post last year, and we submitted those to Post via a transmittal letter of all recommendations from the report that you all had made with respect to Post and their trainings. And so they've received those, and they had a meeting about those last week. And so that's the main DOJ update. Does anyone have any questions? And I believe there are some folks trying to join now. So maybe before we jump in, I have word that Edgar and Lawanda are joining now. I'm looking to see if I don't see them yet, but they should be joining any minute. So maybe Melanie after the SB2. Oh, there's Lawanda. Okay, great. With Lawanda joining, we will have a quorum. And so if you'd like to go back to the minutes, we can do that. Lawanda, welcome.
Good morning.
Do a quick introduction.
Good morning. My name is Lawanda, and I'm from Los Angeles.
Thank you, Lawanda. Do you want to say what organization you're representing as well?
Yes, I'm here representing an organization called Justice for Murdered Children.
Great, thank you. And
Thank
I don't
you.
know, is Edgar, did he make it through yet?
It looks like he is on now.
Oh, let me turn my video on here. Okay, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, welcome.
Oh, sorry
Do you
about
want to
the delay. Yeah, for whatever reason, I had this in my Outlook calendar as a noon meeting, so I apologize for being late.
quickly introduce yourself, Edgar?
Hello, Edgar Hampton. I represent PORAC, which is about 76,000 police officers up and down California. I'm also the former president of the Anaheim Police Association and the Orange County chapter director of PORAC.
Great, thank you. And so since we have a quorum, let's go ahead and vote on the minutes from the September 29th, 2021 subcommittee meeting. Did anyone have any comments with respect to those minutes? Okay. I'll move to approve if someone wants to second.
I'll second. Least I could do for being late.
And I don't think we need a voice vote or a roll call vote, but go ahead. I for approve, I'll approve.
Aye.
And is anyone
Aye.
opposed? Great. So I think did we do that right?
Yes.
Allison? Okay.
Yeah, and no abstentions, right? I think
Oh,
everyone on the subcommittee that I can see voted yes. So I think we are good, and the motion carries, and the minutes were approved.
great. Thank you. So yeah, let's just jump into the updates, and I'll go first on SB2. I did a short PowerPoint. If someone from DOJ doesn't mind pulling it up, I didn't trust myself to be able to figure out how to navigate that.
Problem.
Great.
Can you see the PowerPoint now? Is it up?
I can see it. Everyone else,
And
yeah?
are you only seeing the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay.
So the first thing that was that I'm reporting back on is the SB2 convening that Post held. This was, for those of you not familiar with SB2, this is the Kenneth Ross Jr. Police Decertification Act of 2021. You can go to the next slide. So the decertification, just an overview of that process, is it is, as it says in the name, decertifies officers, peace officers, which means strips them of their certification that's a prerequisite for serving, and gives that authority to post to oversee and execute this process. So prior to SB2, there was not really a process to preclude officers who have been fired from one agency for whatever reason from just being rehired at another agency. And so this bill is trying to create the process to make sure that that does not happen, where someone is shown to be unfit to serve as a peace officer. They're not just being bounced around to other agencies. And that's called the Kenneth Ross Jr. Decertification Bill because he was killed by an officer who had killed other people in other jurisdictions and had been fired and was rehired. So this is some language from the bill. Just right in front of you says, this bill grants the commission the power to investigate and determine the fitness of any person to serve as a peace officer in the state, to issue or deny certification in accordance with specified criteria, and would authorize the commission to suspend or revoke a proof of eligibility or certificate on specified grounds, including the use of excessive force, sexual assault, making a false arrest, or participating in a law enforcement gang. You can go to the next slide. And so the language of SB2 allows for decertification where officers were engaged in serious misconduct, quote unquote, and directs posts to adopt regulations defining serious misconduct, among a host of other things. Sorry for the typo in that. And so the language of the bill specifically says that by January 1st, 2023, the commission shall adopt by regulation a definition that will serve as the criteria for post to determine whether or not someone is ineligible or have their certification revoked. And so on January 27th, Post convened advocates, including co-sponsors of SB2, representatives of organizations, including the RIPA board. So I sat on this convening, organizations that do bias training with officers, et cetera. So there are a lot of folks who are obviously very interested in the way this is going to be defined, convened to give their opinions and insight into how Post should be developing this regulation. There was also a separate law enforcement convening that was held a few weeks prior, where they just convened representatives from law enforcement on that. And so while SB2 directs Post to come up with regulations for a number of issues, including a procedure for accepting complaints about officers to be investigated for possible decertification, the focus of this convening was just the serious misconduct definition. You can go to the next slide. So the definition, according to the statute, is limited to includes but is not limited to all the things that are listed before you. Some of those things are more or less defined, but these are some specifically identified buckets of wrongdoing that are included in the bill. So dishonesty, abuse of power, physical abuse, sexual assault, demonstrating bias, participating in law enforcement gangs, failure to cooperate with investigations, failure to intercede when there's excessive force, and acts that violate the law and are sufficiently egregious or repeated to just be inconsistent with the peace officer's obligations to uphold the law or respect the rights of the public. And so some are very well defined, some are more open-ended if you look at the language that's actually in the statute. And note, none of these things by itself is automatic grounds for removal. It's just grounds for referral to post to consider whether or not someone should be removed and to make the ultimate decision. And so for comparison, just California is not the only state that now has a decertification scheme, but other states are often much less explicit in the types of misconduct that will result in decertification and rely on very broad language like any act or omission that is indicative of bad moral character or untrustworthiness, or just reference to unprofessional conduct or improper or illegal actions that have a rational connection to the person's fitness or capacity to serve as law enforcement officer. So we know decertification will not happen for every wrong thing that happens, but it's important to have officers on notice that any of these things that fall into these various buckets of wrongdoing could be grounds for removal as an officer or removal of their ability to become an officer. Next slide, please. So as you saw in the last slide, one of the specific categories of misconduct that can be a basis for decertification is demonstrating bias. And the language, this is the language that actually is in the statute. So it specifically says demonstrating bias on the basis of race, national origin, religion, gender identity or expression, housing status, sexual orientation, mental or physical disability, or other protected status in violation of law or department policy, or inconsistent with a peace officer's obligation to carry out their duties in a fair and unbiased manner. This paragraph does not limit an employee's rights under the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. And so for purposes of our discussion, I want to focus on the demonstrating bias criteria and what the recommendations were that I had in the course of the convening for that. Go to the next slide, please. So there were really 3 points that I wanted to underscore or raise, make sure that were raised in the context of the post-convening that I think should be included within the demonstrating bias criteria. One, that's clarification that bias incidents can occur whether based on actual or perceived identity. Someone else raised that in the course of the convening, and Post's initial response was that perceived identities would not be the basis for bias claims, which seems inconsistent with how bias and profiling are described in the law, and particularly with RIPA. So I think that's a point worth clarifying. So basically, if an officer thinks you're Black and therefore, exhibits bias against you, it doesn't matter if you're not actually Black. It still happened, and that should be a basis for decertification potentially. The second piece is to include the act of identity profiling as already defined in the law as an example of bias, and I just included the language there, which I don't necessarily need to read, but it's essentially the consideration or reliance to any degree and your protect these identity characteristics as a basis for conducting law enforcement activity. And again, this is already the law. It's already illegal to do this, so I think that is a clear example of bias that should be included as grounds for potential decertification. And then finally, kind of looping back to acts or omissions that would be ground for exclusion as a peace officer under Government Code Section 1031.3, which loops back to AB 846, which is the criteria for exclusion of having implicit or explicit bias. So essentially, it incorporates the Post's guidelines and screening on how it's identifying bias under the AB 846 regulations as another basis for potential decertification. You can go to the next slide. And so those were essentially my recommendations to Post to include in the regulations for how they're developing demonstrating bias. The timeline, I'm not sure of the exact timeline for the next steps for actually putting forth proposed regulations for notice and comment, but if someone from Post is present here, maybe they can answer that. But in terms of immediate next steps for us as RIPA board, and particularly because it's unclear how the public comment period might line up with our full meeting schedule, I think it would be useful to draft a letter and to get full board approval, that would kind of to submit in advance of the regulations being promulgated, or if it lines up, it'll be submitted during the public comment period. That basically encapsulates just primarily what I said before, reasserting the purposes of the bill, that it should not be limited to the most egregious conduct, or what policing agencies have already deemed grounds for termination. That was a point that seemed to be raised as a premise, and at least in the conversations with Post, that even if someone is terminated from like a job in one agency, doesn't mean that they should be precluded from serving another agency, and it's only for the absolute worst conduct. But that seems to be inconsistent with the actual language of the statute and purpose of the statute, which is to hold officers to the highest standards of accountability. And where they demonstrated lack of fitness to serve as peace officers, they're removed from the streets. So suggests that if they're ever determined, that is at least a potential basis for removal. If you're unfit to serve in one community, why would you be fit to serve in another? And that it's kind of an independent process from just what law enforcement has already identified as a basis for termination, and just memorializing the comments around demonstrating bias. So if folks are aligned with that or have other suggestions to be made, I can work with, and whoever else ends up being the co-chair by the end of this meeting can work with DOJ to put together a draft letter for full board approval at our next board meeting, which I think is in March 30th, the end of this month. So we can circle back for that for comments. I don't know if we should discuss this now or wait until we've kind of done updates on everything with respect to Post.
I think,
I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, I think it's up to you all. I think if you want to comment, while this is fresh on all of you, I think it makes sense to take public comment before making a final decision, or taking a vote on whether you'd all like to move this forward. But I think in terms of discussion, if you all want to discuss it now, I think that's fine.
That sounds good. So if folks have any comments or questions about this, let's discuss now, and then we can have a vote on the letter and process after we get public comment as well. As I heard someone else was about to speak. I don't know who that was.
Oh, that was me. May I ask a question? With regards to the recommendation, just to be clear, is evidence of bias being defined in terms of responses to specific incidents and complaints, or are we thinking about data-related internal benchmark, early warning system, looking for outliers types of tools that are used in law enforcement now, and that many have advocated to employ to look for situations where outcomes might suggest bias, and I don't know if that's part of the conversation, or is this mostly when there's some sort of outcome that there's an investigation and there's a report.
So this conversation that we had, I don't know what since they haven't been proposed yet, I don't know how deep the regs will actually go. But in terms of the conversation, it was more in terms of defining what bias is rather than the evidence that could be used to identify it. So for instance, if we adopt the definition that's like exists already within the RIPA Act, that I had included, which is, consideration of race in making decisions. So ostensibly that could be proven by an incident that was substantiated, or it could be proven potentially by statistical data. That wasn't engaged in at all in terms of how it would happen. Just this is the definition. Now, if this is happening, Post determines whether, the factual basis is there, that it existed, and then whether or not they choose to terminate decertify someone on that ground. Did that answer your question, Steve? Yeah, okay. But to that, I guess the next step would to say if there is something that if we want to explicitly raise, given that especially that we are the RIPA board, the value of relying on RIPA data to evaluate these claims or whatever, we could include that as an additional piece that just wasn't raised in the context of our prior discussion.
Well, so there is it's a small but growing and pretty sophisticated research literature out there now on internal benchmarking for this purpose. Um, just if we're thinking about something perhaps to do this year, maybe that's a topic area that we want to look into and see what the science says and how reliable it is. Um, it's quite complicated in some ways because one could imagine that somebody's, the composition of someone's stop center are actually going to depend on a lot on their shift and where they're assigned, and there are some efforts that people have made to try to, I guess, benchmark the data in that way, and then see, where a specific officer, deputy, what have you, looks relative to their norm mean. And then, there's also just kind of this technical issue of the fact that you can have a deviation that is random and you can have a deviation that's statistically significant, and there's tools and debates about what the proper way to do that is. But we perhaps could, make reviewing and learning, both in terms of what, social scientists, statisticians are doing, but then also maybe what departments are doing, a priority, and perhaps it can help inform posts work and our recommendation posts. That's first thinking in mind. I guess the other thing, I think, if we're going to define bias and the use of race, so can we see what the recommendation was? Again, it went relatively quickly. I mean, maybe do we want to talk about that? Just the specific language?
I think slide 6, if DOJ wants to pull that back up, I think that's what Steve's referring to.
Actually, it's not that important. I
I'll
think.
just to let you know the language here is just a quote from the penal code.
Are we being asked to make recommendations on the implementation of this definition?
I mean, we could include in our letter whatever we want. It would be part of the rulemaking file, but what's going on right now is the regulation creation process. And implementation may depend in large part on what is actually put into the regs. That said, as I mentioned kind of at the outset, there are other things that Post is also creating regulations about beyond just the definition of serious misconduct. So it's possible that our input on how we think the Post Commission should actually evaluate these things may find its way into some other part of the regulations that goes beyond this. If there aren't additional comments on this right now, I'll just move forward, but we can also, if there's public comment on this, we can also revisit it when we decide to vote on the regs. I mean, decide to vote on the next steps. And also, we could delegate to anyone to draft the letter. So if folks are very interested in the language or whatever, we can do it with other people as well. Okay. So the next, can DOJ pull up the second part of the, and I'm sorry, were there any other comments right now on the SB2? So AB 846 regulations, this is the implicit explicit bias screening. Can you go to the next slide, please? And if you remember from our prior, this is just a background in terms of kind of what it was and how we got engaged in this. AB 846 directed Post to develop regulations for screening peace officer candidates to include measures of implicit and explicit bias. And this is just quoted language. Excuse me. From the law. And you can go to the next slide. And this is what I recall of the overview. Someone from DOJ or Post can correct me if I'm wrong in the history here, but essentially Post noticed draft regulations in last year regarding the process and criteria for assessing bias in that process. We discussed it a few times, the RIPA subcommittee and full board. We ultimately submitted a letter in public comment period requesting that they require not just include an option to review the candidate's social media, and also require that relevant findings and determinations and the factual basis for them are recorded in the process. Post had initially responded that it was not going to revise the regulations to address these issues in terms of because of timing, but left open the door for further engagement. I cannot recall now if we submitted another letter. I know we discussed it, but I can't remember if we actually did. And then Post submitted the regulations, but Office of Administrative Law rejected and required them to engage with our comments, not necessarily accept them, but to engage with us on them. And then so we had conversations with Post, clarifying the comments, making clear that it wasn't an intent to shift responsibility for making certain determinations to different actors, because there's the investigator and the evaluator, and it was an attempt to shift responsibility, just documenting what each person was doing, and making the social media required thing to review. They agreed to make those changes to address our concerns that we raised above. You can skip to the next slide. And perhaps someone from Post, in addition to, I'm sorry we didn't get Post to talk about the deadlines, the timeline for SB2 yet, but someone can speak to the exact status of where the regulations are. We've seen some drafts, but there haven't been the final regulations yet, and it's my understanding that they're going to be vetted with law enforcement as well. Someone can confirm if that's accurate. But based on the proposed revisions that we've seen and responses to Post to a few additional changes, minor things in language, we understand that they should satisfy all of RIPA's concerns, what they're going to come up with the next round. If that's true, then I think the intent is also for someone from RIPA to give comments at the post-commission meeting where the regulations are going to be discussed in the future, when the final version is in play, and if they're what we anticipate them being, I don't see a need to submit another set of comments, but we'll have to see, I guess, ultimately what happens. And that's the stats of that. So I don't know if someone from Post, if anyone on the subcommittee has questions, or if anyone from Post wants to comment on kind of the status of both the SB2 regs and the AB 846 regs.
Hi, Melanie. It's Melanie Singley from Post. Yeah, we worked together on developing some recommendations for going to the commission meeting in May regarding social media and some other concerns that you had regarding providing more specific information as far as findings are concerned. So those are what are moving forward. Currently, I do have those proposed regulations out to our stakeholders. I gave them until tomorrow to take a look at them. And then I'm also sending out a survey to our stakeholders regarding the use of social media, because I want to get more feedback as far as how they use that and who's doing it and that sort of thing. So once that's done, I'll give them probably a week to do that. So I would anticipate sending that out probably on Wednesday after I get the feedback from the stakeholders, and then I'll give them maybe a week to get feedback back. And then it may need to go back to our Attorney General for review if there's any changes. And then I will give all those recommendations to you guys. So you should have them in time for, I think, your March 30th meeting. Is that accurate? Yeah. So I don't know when's the last day for you to be able to incorporate those into your meeting, like the recommendations that we have. Like, when do you need to have them to you where you can have them to review at the meeting is what I'm asking.
I think a few days in advance, particularly if it's just going to be us reporting on it, saying like we feel like Post, responded. Here's the draft. Does anyone else have comments? There's none, then there's really nothing else to do, except for, find out if folks have remaining issues, which I don't anticipate, and I don't think we would need to have a letter or anything drafted in advance of that since we're not going to have additional comments.
Okay. Yeah, I would anticipate probably by the end of next week or beginning of the following week, I can get you those draft. I incorporated the 3 of the 4 that you had, and then I did speak with our legal counsel. So we did take out any references to laws. So now just as state and federal laws, we're leaving those up to agencies to determine that aspect of it. But so it's pretty much what you've seen already, plus the additional like editorial stuff that you had. So, and that's what went out to our stakeholders. And again, I'm just waiting for feedback from them. So that's where we are on that as far as it's concerned. And it will go to the commission in May. We may end up taking the regulations to OAL prior to the commission for the 15-day public comment, since we can resubmit this to OAL, just so if there's feedback from other people, we're going to be able to take that to the commission too. So we're not in the same situation where, we get feedback from you guys and now it's like delays it further. I think if we have feedback ahead of time, that would be ideal. I don't know if we'll be able to do that time-wise, but either they're going to go to the commission in May regardless. We may do the 15-day public comment prior to that. Just don't know yet, depending on timing. So that's where we are on that. And I don't know if anyone else had any questions regarding that, or if you do.
I should have actually asked Allison maybe on a timing piece, if we want to include the draft as something on the agenda, like a copy of that, so that the public has that as well in advance of the meeting. Is there a deadline for that getting to you?
I think if we want to, so we are having, we didn't post specifically, but for the agenda, we're having subcommittee report outs, and so this will be part of the post subcommittee report out. So I think in terms of posting to the website, because of limitations here, I think if we had it by the 25th, we could post it to the website for members of the public to be able to review as well. And obviously if we get it earlier, we can post it earlier, but if we're posting other board materials, they'll probably be posted by, I would say, the 25th in order to make sure that everyone has a chance to review them. Again, if something happens, we can post obviously as late. We want them to post them before the 30th, just so everybody has a chance to review. But, we can post them. We have some limitations on Friday afternoons with posting, but otherwise we can post them, as soon as we receive them. We can work with our web team to get them posted.
And you'll have them well in advance of that, so that shouldn't be a problem. I just want to make sure we had a timeline, so.
And Melanie, did you want to speak to the SB2 timeline too? Are you able to do that one?
No. No, I've been working on that, but on a periphery, so I can't speak to that, unfortunately. I wish I could, but I'm not sure. I know they're working on some regulations now that are more procedural, from what I understand. And that might be the misconduct stuff too. I don't know, but I don't want to.
To that, this is Megan Polis with Post also. So the SB2 regulations, there's going to be 2 sets. The first set is going to be without the serious misconduct piece. Those regulations will go out around March 25th for public comment. And then we expect the serious misconduct piece to go out for public comment probably sometime around the first part of June.
So it seems, thank you for that. So it seems like just in terms of, and I'm sorry, the one's going on, it's 45 days, is that right, for the first public comment period? That would be for the March 25th ones?
Yes, I believe so.
So maybe just as a flag, we may want to try to get a board level public comment on the content of the rest of the regulations, even though we haven't had a chance to see it, just see if there's something that stands out that we want to opine on. And I guess we could do process at the board meeting for how that could go forward. actually, maybe Allison, is there any, would we just identify the points that we want to discuss and delegate to some people to work with DOJ to get it out, since we only are going to have the one board meeting during the public comment period?
That's what we have done in the past is the board has agreed on the concepts and then the final letter, and agreed to let the co-chairs, for example, work on the final letter. We can also, depending on the timing, we can also schedule a post subcommittee meeting if you all, would like to discuss in more detail. But again, that doesn't get, the full board approval, but it could, at least post can kind of, the subcommittee can work with some of the concepts too. But in order to get full board approval, they would have to agree on the concepts and then agree to delegate the co-chairs to work on the letter. And I will note too, we actually do, because the post-commission meeting addressing the AB 846 regulations was actually originally going to happen in March and is now in May. There is actually, there's 13 minutes in the subcommittee meeting to address AB 846 or just to address an update on the post-commission meeting. And that was meant to address AB 846. So there is also a little bit of extra time in addition to just the subcommittee report back at the full board meeting where you all, can discuss some of these issues in more detail.
Okay. Thank you. And so maybe, is it possible for DOJ to send to the full board the regulations that post comes up with on March 25th so that folks have a chance to maybe look at them and get initial responses in advance of the March 30th meeting?
Yeah, the sending a copy of the regulations that Post is coming up with, then yes, we can certainly send those out to the board as well and let everyone know that that will be one of the topics that the Post subcommittee would like to discuss at the meeting.
Okay, and maybe with the premise that to take a look, and because we will ideally, if there are issues, like to send a letter. So we'd like to identify the issues that folks want to discuss at that.
Sure, and we can work with you on, as chair, and once a co-chair is elected as well, we can work with you all on, any particular messages that you'd like to send to the full board regarding that.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. Any questions on AB 846 from the subcommittee? All right, thank you. I think someone is going to, I'm not sure who's going to present on the Post and Museum of Tolerance training.
Angela or Dominique, did you want to give an overview of the training or just jump right in?
Sorry. There we go. Hi, good morning. Wonderful topics. And so we attended the Post Museum of Tolerance trainer. The curriculum is 20 years old, and as I was exposed to it, it was actually groundbreaking 20 years ago. And so we have an opportunity to do some groundbreaking updates. We want to develop the curriculum so that it addresses the public outcry regarding discriminatory treatment, which is supported by the RIPA data. So, and as you saw the report this year, you saw where Black people were detained more than others, and then when there are searches, there's a no find. They don't find anything. It's kind of like harassment. Police are stopping Black people on bicycles more than anyone else. Black people are seated on sidewalks in handcuffs, detained in cars, and so the data is supporting the public outcry. So we want to develop the curriculum so that it addresses the public outcry as well as eliminating racial profiling. So we want to try to think about maybe a grid, some type of grid, like one of the officers in the group was, a training officer is talking to his officers about hey, think about what you're doing before you stop someone. And so perhaps we can think about an ethical, judicial, and legal thought grid where they have to think about the rights of the person. They have to think about, hey, am I pulling this person over just because he's black? Why am I doing this? Am I going to violate their rights? Is there reasonable suspicion? And on and on and on. So we have to try to incorporate that into the curriculum where they think more seriously about it. And the ultimate goal, I believe, should be to humanize people and eliminate the us versus them mentality so officers can have more of a community approach and do more community policing, recognizing that they too are part of a community. They may not be a part of that community, but they are part of the community. And we thought about, and we're going to really push for more role playing in the training so that officers can, especially officers who've never really come into contact with black and brown people throughout their life, they can feel, what is it like? How do people feel when they're stopped by the police in general? What does it feel like to think about having to talk, surviving a police stop, which most black and brown parents give their children. We all have this talk. How do you survive a police stop? Especially the fathers, we do it regularly. And what does it feel like to be singled out? What does it feel like to be considered a suspect versus a law-abiding citizen? Most of the stops for black people were because officers felt like they were suspicious of committing some type of crime. That's what the data shows. We're looking at even changing some of their scenarios. Like one of the scenarios, a student was, they're given a description of a person, and there's a target on the wall, and they determine if it's a bad stop, a good stop, or an okay stop. And so in that particular part of the training, we want them to change up the racial identity of the folks and see if police come up with different reasons for stopping or not stopping and discuss those feelings. We really are interested in the video where just having more discussion on, like to have one video where 3 cars passed a school, and the third car was stopped instead of the first car. The first car, there was someone in the crosswalk, and the person got a pass. And the car ran through the stop sign with a person in the actual stopwalk, in the actual stop, in the walking area. And they got a pass. But that third person was pulled over. So it was a clear case of racial profiling. But the question I ask is, why didn't anyone discuss the officer giving this person a pass when in California it is a major violation to drive past someone who's in a crosswalk? There was no discussion on that. Why did that person get a pass? And so those are the types of things that we're thinking about, and also just helping the group think about how do we raise the level of the police officer's profile in this state. Being a police officer should be a great honor. And how do we raise that level, bring it back to people respecting officers when they're on the streets, and officers respecting community members, and we have a great relationship. So we want to try to direct that training where police officers leave the training recognizing that, hey, I have an honorable position in this state, and I'm going to live that out. So those are some of the things that we thought about as I thought about as I was in the training. Any questions?
Just had a, maybe this is, thank you for that report back for sure. Did it seem like there was much discussion? Because I know this has kind of come up a few times where the focus is on stops, whether or not someone is stopped. And I know that from engaging with agencies, as long as there's a justification for stop, like everyone went through this, the crosswalk, right? So hypothetically, they could have stopped all three. So therefore, there's the understanding from the agencies is it's not a problem because there's a reason. It wasn't, a completely lack of reason for stopping that person, so therefore they're justified. And so is there anything about to like the next steps and how the decision making is made to put someone on the curb or, handcuff them or search them or do these things in the context of this training, or is it all like has a decision been made to why is the decision being made to stop someone in the first place? Because I think the additional actions, even though they're part of the law with respect to what is bias policing, are completely overlooked in the training that I have seen and the discussions that I have seen, even though it's some of the most obvious examples of disparities in terms of the amount of force use, the amount of searches asked for, when there's not a basis for a reasonable suspicion for a search and another reason. So is that, I guess, how much is that part woven into this training?
That's a great question, because our data shows that Black and brown people experience more excessive force during the stops. And so we didn't talk, I don't recall a lot of discussion on how to, if you will, adjudicate the stop, the outcome of the stop. What do you do as a result of stopping them? We did see where there was some harassment of some youngsters who were just kind of standing around the store. They were harassed. And so I will double check that, but also incorporate into, push to have incorporated into the new curriculum. What do you say to people? How do you end that stop with a positive result versus someone ending up dead or someone filing a complaint because they felt like you profiled them, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a great question. I will pay more attention to that and really push to have how you handle the stop incorporated into the training as well.
If I may jump in here, Melanie, this is Dominique Alcaraz with the Department of Justice. So Kendall and I both attended the training, and just in response to your question, and tying it back to the example that Pastor Kennedy just mentioned, there wasn't really much discussion about the after effects of the stop or even the stop in some senses. So in the scenario that Pastor Kennedy brought up, where there were several cars that went through a stop sign and the officer didn't stop all of them and only stopped the last car, which looked to have, or the facilitator's guide describes it as having two Latino teenage boys driving the car. The way that we were explained how they facilitate the course and what is discussed in that moment, sorry, my video was off, I'm here now, is they ask the students, do you think this is racial profiling? And then there's some discussion, but that discussion obviously will vary with every class. There was no point from the facilitators about really digging into that. So ultimately what we heard as the end result of that conversation, it was, well, we actually don't know if that was racial profiling because we don't know what was in the mind of the officer. And so that's kind of where it's left. And it's just, they only discuss the decision to stop someone or not. It doesn't go into whether to search someone, whether to handcuff them, sit them on the curb, or any of that. But that's just specifically to that scenario. That's kind of where the discussion of whether or not this was racial profiling stops at that time.
And thank you, Dominique. And is there any, I don't know if the DOJ has this information or Post has this information about how we can get involved in that, and how, if we have comments and feedback, how that could be incorporated, because I'm not actually 100% sure who is totally in control of the creation of this training? This is a post training, even though it's through the Museum of Racial Tolerance.
If I can speak to that, this is Megan again from Post. So this is actually a Museum of Tolerance training. Post, for lack of better terms, simply certifies the course for Museum of Tolerance. So really the curriculum and the detail of this course lies with Museum of Tolerance.
So we do have some input into the development of the new curriculum. And so it's pretty cool to be invited to the table to have input.
And it's our understanding that Post certifies this course. So the materials that Museum of Tolerance puts together will be submitted to Post and then be certified to be given out to folks. But please correct me if I'm wrong, Megan.
No, you're correct.
Yes. And this is Aisha. I would just like to add that this course, as Pastor Kennedy mentioned, was created 20 years ago. And so Post and the Museum of Tolerance reached out to the board because they are in the process of updating the course. And what's so significant about this is it is a 5-hour train the trainer course. And so any officer who wants to present on racial profiling at their agency, at the agency level, must be certified by Post. So it is a very, very important course because it touches courses that the academy, in the academy training curriculum, and also in service. So it's a huge opportunity and honor to have the board participate. So, and it's my understanding that there are a couple more sessions that are coming up. So there's a series that Post and the Museum of Tolerance are hosting. And again, also Megan, correct me if I'm wrong. I know that the Museum of Tolerance is taking the lead on this, but Post is very much involved in the courses and the sessions. So, and there are 2 more coming up.
So I think there's a small bit of confusion on this course in particular. It's a 4-hour course. It is a train the trainer course. The curriculum is controlled by the Museum of Tolerance. Post certifies the course that Aisha was speaking about to essentially develop those trainers to take back to their agencies. Now, the other part, Post is working to update a video, which is also going along with this, these meetings that are happening, and that is what's going to be incorporated into the academy. So there's kind of a couple of things going on at the same time with the same group of people with the Museum of Tolerance, but again, Post only certifies the curriculum that the Museum of Tolerance is putting together. It's really their course, and we just help them with the certification piece.
So
we're also going to recommend that the follow-up courses. So you have the big course, 4 or 5 hour course, and then every 3 years they have to come back for recertification or get more training. We're going to recommend that happens more frequently, and see what kind of traction we get there.
And Megan, when you say Post certifies the course, just to be clear, what does that technically mean? Is there a standard that you have to meet to be certified? Because I would imagine you can't just throw together any kind of course without any criteria to be satisfied for Post to certify it. So can you just clarify what that process is?
Yeah, absolutely. So
make that determination.
So any course that is certified through Post goes through quite a rigorous process as far as what we look at, who the instructors are, but certifying a course allows for agencies to then take that curriculum that's been developed by the Museum of Tolerance to take to their agency and certify it so that their officers basically get the credit that they need for taking that course. So with the law stating that they have to take this type of course every 3 years, the agency can then take that certified course and then get that credit for taking it as the law states. It's it's not an easy process to get a course certified through POST. There's a lot of steps. We don't, like you said, we don't just certify anything. But obviously, having the Museum of Tolerance do something like this is important to us to have them there doing this.
It might be useful to have whatever criteria it is that POST looks at to certify when we're visiting the class to make sure it's hitting those marks, because not talking about something that is half of the law on what is racial bias seems like a big issue, right? So I just want to make sure as we're looking at the course that we're evaluating it to say, is it actually hitting these criteria that POST actually needs to certify, so it's not just a rubber stamp because it's gone through the process before and it has, value.
Sure.
The law has changed. Make sure that it reflects the change in the law, right? Because it was certified still, even though the law had changed and it hadn't been updated to reflect that. So,
sure. So POST does have regulations as to the certification process. It's Regulation 1052 on our website, and that really gives you the better outline of how that certification works.
Okay. And then you said POST itself is though updating the video to be included in that. I guess, is there a space for us to provide feedback into what should be in that video?
I believe they're using the same group of people. I believe it's kind of a twofold. I don't know if my colleague is on that is in charge of the project that can speak to it.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Charles.
Okay, great. Yeah, you're correct. The cognitive scaffolding and the content for the curriculum is in POST regulations. We can provide that one to you. And we first started off this process of reviewing the curriculum on the December 20th, did a follow-up meeting on January 24th. Those were 2 virtual meetings that we had regarding the curriculum. We were looking to correlate the curriculum philosophy with the content and including in the recommendations by RIPA, those best practices that you mentioned in your 2021 and 22 report. And so we're factoring all of those areas of concern into the curriculum design and development. It was a really great experience having the 4 representatives from RIPA involved with the process, because we can ensure some consistency with the recommendations by the RIPA panel, so that we don't have surprises. And so we want to reduce the unintended consequences by including in the factual data that's evidence-based through RIPA. And so we have a schedule of events that's coming up regarding it. The next meeting is on March 21st through the 24th. And again, we'll be taking a look at the cognitive scaffolding, introducing a new coordinator digital media to help pull together all of the aspects of the curriculum. We'll have additional meetings coming up May 9th. And by the way, you don't have to write this down, Madeline. I'll send it to you. Yeah, May 9th, we have additional meetings to dialogue finalization of the curriculum alignment, scenario logistics, testimonial video narratives, and we'll be focusing on specific areas that you've been discussing here today. So RIPA will actually have an opportunity to be instrumental in crafting the nuances of all of those presentations.
And were these the points that Aisha flagged as that we could potentially get involved in? She mentioned that there are some meetings we could potentially.
Yes, all of those, including those that were mentioned in your 2021 and 22 recommendations for best practices regarding racial profiling.
Thank you. And did Ronnie have, I think, also some report back on this as well?
Yes, can you guys hear me? So I'm having trouble with my internet over here. Yeah, I was able to attend, what was it, the 31st to 2nd, I believe it was. I mean, just like my initial take on the curriculum and just the facilitation process, I just for one, I couldn't help but shake the feeling of, I'm 24 years old, and, this curriculum was written 20 years ago and hasn't been updated since. So there was, a lot of, I guess, fear and anxiety coming into it because I already know it's going to be super outdated. But, just in terms of the course itself, it needs to exceed the minimum standards set by law. We need to establish the highest ethical and legal standards for officers regarding racial and identity profiling. The ultimate goal of this curriculum should be to shift the culture and perception of law enforcement of minority communities. And, sitting there for the 5 hours, I don't think is sufficient. I think we need more time to discuss in a meaningful way. And sort of, our ongoing for service officers, it should be up here. My biggest, the biggest thing that I got from it, was there wasn't much community members included. There wasn't really a space created so that community can come speak their truths. They're not included throughout the course development process. It's everyone who is affected by these biracial and identity profiling needs to be at the table in order to share their experience with law enforcement, how they've been traumatized. It's been for generations, and it's just something that I feel needs to be at the center of this process if we're really trying to affect real change, especially with this curriculum that touches, it's intersectional and process. It's pivotal to the entirety of law enforcement, in my opinion. Another thing that really stood out to me was, I just, in my opinion, it needs to be rewritten, from top to bottom. Society has changed, our views has changed, everything from 2002 until now. It's changed so much, and just looking at it, I think they gave me physical copies of the guide itself and the facilitator guide. And on the second page, I open it and I see Lee Baca's name is still on this thing. And it's just, to me, it's like, I don't know, just as a person, how can Post continue to, hand out something that's this outdated, but still have the name on there, right? Has there not really been an attempt to really update this thing? And it's a little frustrating to be honest. I think about the cadets going to the academy right now, and if they were to see this curriculum the way that it is, if I'm a cadet in the academy, I'm not going to take it seriously. The videos were done on VHS, I'm pretty sure, and they were converted to digital formats. Just everything about this curriculum, it's antiquated. There's a lot that needs to be done. And from me being there, I was able to sit in on only one day of the actual trainee because there was a situation between myself and the Museum of Tolerance in terms of my attending, but that's a whole other matter. One of the participants who was there, he also shared the same sentiments with me. And, it's just feel that we need to include community. I feel that we need to, start from step one, square one, and really try to just recreate what this is. Someone who's experienced racial identity profiling, someone who's witnessed it. I've seen it in my community. I've lived and breathed it, unfortunately, for a very long time, growing up, Black and brown communities. But I don't think that we're hitting the mark. I feel like we're falling short. And if we're really trying to do something that's substantive and that truly is, innovative, we need to start with community. We need to center it in community. And there's just so much that needs to be done here in order for me as a board member to sign off on this thing. Say, all right, I approve of this thing. But those are just initial thoughts. And sorry, I was all over the place. I'm trying to
say everything that I wanted to.
Thank you, Ronnie. Is there anyone else on the board that has comments? Otherwise, or maybe it's best. Because I want the DOJ to let us know kind of what the exactly kind of what the next steps are for plugging in, and if there's a space kind of to follow up on Ronnie's point to try to elicit community participation to also be involved in this process in any way. I don't know if DOJ can speak to that now, or else we can have other board members comment on what they've heard so far.
If I may, Melanie, this is Dominique again. I think it would be helpful to kind of give you all a little background about what we attended in the first place, because I'm not sure if that was shared out. I know that the opportunity was given to the board. Let's see, I apologize again, my video is off. So we were invited, or the board was invited by Post and the Museum of Tolerance to attend a 3-day meeting that was supposed to be about, updating this curriculum. And Pastor Kennedy and Ronnie Villeda went to that training, as well as myself and Kendall. So we were, we met for 3 days. We went over the current course, which is 5 hours, and that's the 5-hour course to train the trainers who then go back to their agencies to give this training to folks. During those 3 days, we had the facilitators of the course, or a few of the facilitators of the course, sort of do a run through with us of that 5 hours, not in 5 hours, but of those 5 hours, walk through the scenarios with us, show us the videos they had used or have been using and actually still are currently using to this day, including last month. And then we sort of talked about who the target audience is for this course, what to expect or what to consider when thinking about this curriculum, how to best approach or how to best teach this material to that group of people. And we also, went over sort of the law, so RIPA, and other laws that pertain to what needs to be trained, but that's the main one. And then talked about, what are things that are not currently in this course that need to be included in this course, pulling from, as Charles from Post mentioned, the board's report last year and previous recommendations that they've made about training, and also discussing RIPA data and just a lot of other thoughts that people in the room who either have trained the course before, work in Post, or from our perspective over here with the board, of things that need to be perhaps updated with the course. I just want to add a few more things for background understanding based on the comments that the board members have made. Pastor Kennedy mentioned that this course 20 years ago was groundbreaking, but we are now 20 years past that point. And so I think something that the board would be interested to know as well is that this course currently doesn't include anything on implicit or explicit bias. And that is potentially because there are other courses that Post has that talk about implicit and explicit bias, but perhaps members of the board upon reviewing this would think that this too should touch on it, even if only a little bit, because it currently doesn't have any of that. I think the additional point that would be good to know as well is that this training in and of itself, because it was created 20 years ago and the need at that time was about only racial profiling, this course currently only discusses racial profiling, not anything else. So of course the board is the Racial and Identity Profiling Advisory Board. The act is racial and identity profiling. So that is currently also something that is not included, and I think the board could provide really great insight on. I'll want to hand it over to Kendall and see if there's anything else that I missed that you all should know before sort of talking about next steps. And if there are any other questions, I know board member Raphael had his hand up. So I'll let Kendall go, and then we'll get to the next steps or questions you all have.
Hi, can folks hear me? For some reason, my audio or video has been having some issues.
We can hear you, Kendall.
Perfect. And so I apologize if Megan from Post already mentioned this, but at their Post last meeting, which was, I believe, last week, we were able to take a look at the budget and contracts with Post for the year. And it does, like Post, does look like Post does provide the Museum of Tolerance yearly with, and I'm rounding this number, but it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $1.5 million to the Museum of Tolerance regarding this training. This training is really important because it's being used in kind of two different places. So it's being used as a part of that 5-hour course, as well as a 2-hour update for the Train the Trainer. This timeline's pretty quick. We're on it looks like Post is trying to move through this by the end of this year. And so one thing the board needs to consider, one is, what kind of feedback could the board provide that could potentially be incorporated in this course? And that's certainly something Museum of Tolerance or Post could speak better to, as to how they do anticipate incorporating the board's feedback, since we have been invited to these trainings. Another thing that came up, and I believe Pastor Kennedy and Ronnie both mentioned this, is the Museum of Tolerance and Post encourage board members to potentially involve other community members in these forums. That was one concern that was expressed by multiple board members, was having more community involvement, not only in the course content, but in the course creation itself. Some things that were discussed were, for example, movies, for example, right? When you're showing a movie, you always show it in front of a critical audience as part of the production. And so those are some things as well, is, how the board can work with the community and providing input in this as well. This is a big update that's needed to happen for a while. It looks like this timeline is really tight. And so that's one thing for the board to consider as well, is potentially making recommendations regarding the timeline of this course. So feedback can be meaningfully incorporated, as well as I think that might guide what type of feedback the board wants to provide, as well as the level of community engagement that would be possible. And so that's ultimately something we need to gather from Post regarding that timeline, is how they anticipate incorporating the board's feedback, because I think that would help determine the board's next steps, whether it's a write-up in the report of the course content, or whether it's more hands-on participation in the development of this new Museum of Tolerance training. And so those are some of the updates I had. I don't want to talk too much. I wanted to give Ronnie and Pastor Kennedy an opportunity to weigh in with a few more comments. And then with that, I'll turn it back over to the rest of the board.
Pastor Kennedy, I wanted to make just a quick comment. I just noted your comment on trying to think about ways to have people think more about the steps of stops and be reflective, and whether to make the stop itself. And it brought to mind some recent results, relatively recent, on procedural justice training for officers, that incorporated a sort of method for getting people to reflect upon specific incidents or interactions they've had with member of the public, with a superior, regardless of whether there was a complaint, with an attempt to try to focus attention on, if they can think through the different steps of their interaction, whether what they did reflected their training along a particular domain, which was a procedural justice domain. And what the researchers had found was having that regular experiential sort of dissection of their interactions was actually leading to lower uses of force and more stops and interactions and call for services being resolved without an arrest, which I thought was quite fascinating. And it's a paper by or the studies by Emily Owens at UC Irvine and a bunch of her colleagues. I can't remember what the title is, but I can find it and forward it. And it might be just, if we're thinking about a pedagogical way of trying to lock in whatever is being conveyed in the training. Perhaps maybe if that can be incorporated into the training of the trainers, have officers think about specific instances and then funnel the training through their specific experiences.
That was one of the testimonies from a training officer during the training. He challenged his officers on why they were about to stop someone versus it was a white student versus a black or brown student. What makes you think it's okay to stop them? This student did the same thing. So why are you stopping them? So thinking through a grid, you're right. So it's nice to have data that proves that. And that's what he was doing. He was trying to get them to think through a grid before you act. Think. The thing mom taught us all. Think before you act, you know. Don't just jump out there and start thinking. Another one that I will really push hard on is getting leaders inside the department to acknowledge that this really is a problem. Racial profiling is a problem. And once you acknowledge that you have a problem, it doesn't mean every officer is doing it. But department-wide, the data shows that we have a problem. And once you acknowledge you have a problem, then you can train differently. The trainers will train differently, and the participants will learn differently. Well, let me say it this way. Once you acknowledge you have a problem and you acknowledge you want to change, then the trainers and the participants will train differently. They will train for change. And so, you know, we'll talk through that. How do we acknowledge that we have a problem?
I just want to say to your earlier point as well, or maybe it was Dominique who said this, that the conclusion was, we don't know if it's profiling because we don't know what's in their heart or what was in their mind when they stopped the person. And that is literally what I've heard from almost every chief and every sheriff from every agency. And so that is definitely the kind of training for sure. And like that's the mindset of the officers. And like, to your point, you have to do differently, right? If we want a different outcome, because that's exactly the kind of thought process that's being filtered down. And so I'm not sure if we had a clear statement of what folks can and this board can do if they want to be engaged, like where they need to show up, who they need to talk to, what times, dates, etc. Kind of what the next steps are for us actually engaging. I'm not sure who is the appropriate person to tell us that, but can someone maybe DOJ has that concisely, so we can see kind of who wants to step in.
Hi, Melanie. Yeah, we have, I can tell you at least the most recent upcoming meetings that will take place that, which Charles also mentioned. They are March 21st to the 24th. And those will be 8:30 a.m. to 5-ish days. As for the details of what's happening those days, I'm afraid I don't have those. Perhaps Charles or someone else from Post has those. But my understanding is we will be doing more curriculum development those days. The future days that Charles mentioned in May are going to be the days for the video meetings. And so again, I'm not sure about the details of how those meetings will go, if there's going to be actual filming those days, or if we're going to get, plans for what they intend to film, and we'll review those. I'm not sure, but May is supposed to be the video dates, and these upcoming in March are more curriculum development. Last time we left that meeting, my understanding was that we were going to get sort of a paper copy of the new curriculum that was going to be created based on the discussions we already had during those first 3 days. But I'm not sure if that's still the plan, because I think there may have been some changes with who was developing that written material. But that is the future upcoming dates, and my understanding is that other members of the committee are permitted to come whenever they can to those days. But I am not sure beyond those two sets of meetings that I'm aware of, what the other, opportunities are. So I think it would be great to invite Post to give us more information on that. I will also add, as far as the piece about community member engagement or participation, I think what would be helpful, and I know that board member Villeda is doing this, is providing names to the Museum of Tolerance folks. So perhaps if others on the committee have suggestions, those can also be sent to the Museum of Tolerance as well. Kendall, is there anything that I missed as far as upcoming information for next steps where they can participate?
I don't think you missed any of the next steps. I think Charles mentioned there was a series of meetings before the board was engaged. We were not invited to those meetings. So the first meeting we were invited to was in February. The May 9th meeting, at least DOJ was made aware of that by Post during this meeting. So unfortunately, we don't have additional details of what's going to be taking place. We hope that there will be better communication with us regarding those. That's certainly something we've reached out to folks, both Post and Museum of Tolerance, regarding timelines. So unfortunately, we can't provide much more update. I can share that the curriculum designer we met in February will no longer be the curriculum designer working on this particular course, which of course leaves us with some questions as to what will be presented to board members at this upcoming March meeting. I mention this because we anticipated looking at potentially the new course updates, but since a new curriculum designer has been retained, we don't know what product, if any, will be presented to us then. I'd also like to note we also do not know anything about this new curriculum designer. So we don't have a bio, we don't know any more background other than they've retained someone else.
Thank you both. I think because we only have 30 minutes left of the meeting and we still haven't, I've done a horrible job shepherding through this agenda, but these were a lot of important conversations to be had. So I would suggest that DOJ just follow up, Post, provide to DOJ a description of what's going to happen on each of the days so that they can send that out to the board members so that they can determine, which days probably, if they can't go to all of it, which days are the best use of their time. And also just re-up the request for sending names of any community organizations that can be involved to you guys so that they can make its way to Museum of Tolerance or Post so they can do that outreach to get them. And then any other information that you might have on engaging just be sent via email to all the board members so that we can move forward. Okay. We've talked about a lot of stuff, so maybe we can do, unfortunately, only 10 minutes of discussion on the next report. Hopefully that's enough for now so we can have a chance for public comments, because I know they want to get public comment after we've had that initial discussion. So just wanted to open up to things, what folks think should be the next items, just to flag. For some of from the last report, some of the next steps included review of Learning Domain 42 on cultural diversity, fact gathering and understanding just more about the post development of trainings, responding to the Little Hoover Commission's evaluations of post training. And yeah, just kind of ongoing monitoring of prior recommendations like report backs. So those are things that were flagged in the last report. I'll just say I put a vote towards trying to do more fact development on what's going on in actual post trainings and recommendations to get posts to kind of report back on how they actually work, how they determine what's going to be renewed or reevaluated, get input from folks who have participated in that process to see kind of how it matches up with on that side and how they experience it. I think that'd be useful to really better understand if there's a way that these should be fundamentally that we should recommend that they should fundamentally be changed at all, or if they're working well in terms of developing these things. So anyone else want to comment on what you would like to see us engage in for next year's report? I think if folks are engaged in the Museum of Tolerance training, I think our report back on that would necessarily be included in the report. So just to flag that as well.
Hi, this is Board Member Lawanda. I just would like to know, are there other entities besides the Museum of Tolerance that are doing this type of training? Offering this type of training besides the Museum of Tolerance? Are there any other entities in the state that Post is supporting that's offering this type of training?
This is Megan again. I don't have an answer for you. As far as I know, we are only, well, not we, Museum of Tolerance is the only one that's doing this type of training right now. We do have an open data website on our website that you were to type in racial profiling, it would bring up any sort of training that Post has certified on racial profiling. There could certainly be groups out there that do this type of training that are not Post certified. I always caution people of that as well. But Museum of Tolerance is the only one that does the Train the Trainer program, and that's mandatory. So I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Hi, this is Charles. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. The reason that Museum of Tolerance is that they're the lone presenter of the Train the Trainer. Back in 2000, Senate Bill 1102 identified them. Post was directed to use the cognitive scaffolding presented by Museum of Tolerance. However, when AB 953 amended the Penal Code, Museum of Tolerance was actually eliminated as the primary presenter. So as Megan stated, if you go into the Post website and just click on course catalog, you can pull up those various agencies. There's Post partners that are presenting the racial profile training.
Just as a question, is that material that's in those trainings incorporated into or reviewed at least in the development of whatever this update is going to be from Museum of Tolerance?
Yeah, each one of those presenters have to submit what we call an expanded course outline. Those outlines have to be approved by Post because there's certain content that has to be included in each of those courses.
But I mean, so now there's other courses. Is in the development of this new course, this updated course, are they looking at what other folks are providing as whether best practices, examples, et cetera, to think about how they might want to update their own?
Yeah, moving forward, anyone presenting the racial profile course will have to actually go through, as they have been, they would actually have to go through the Train the Trainer. And then the curriculum that's now being pulled together in partnership with RIPA will set the standard for the courses moving forward. The guide that we provided was all based off that Senate Bill 1102. That was the lens through which the current curriculum was framed. Moving forward, AB 953 will be the lens through which we're looking to design the curriculum.
Thank you. Are there any other suggestions, comments, input on the ideas for next year's report? So maybe I can recommend, based on what we had in the prior year report, and and building off of this discussion, that maybe we include kind of report back and, if necessary, recommendations around the train the trainer. It will depend, I guess, in some degree where that actually is at that moment. If given the need for, it seems like a more in-depth reevaluation and reworking of that might be necessary than was anticipated. So it sounds like the timeline, if it really intends to do that, may need to be a little different than was initially proposed. But including that and recommendations around that, whatever updates come from the SB2 and AB 846 engagement, I don't know how detailed that might end up being. A discussion of LD 42, which we flagged before, and to some degree, and that will depend on our ability to kind of move through that, because that I think is a very substantial task. And then to some degree, some fact development on the post process, so that is more clearly articulated somewhere, and we have some input from folks who have investigated that, and I think probably need to solicit some testimony from post and others who have engaged in it, to be able to at least factually report back on what that has looked like. Hopefully give recommendations on things that might need to be changed, but that might be more of a 2-year process depending on the timeline for us being able to gather the facts in the first place. Does that sound feasible? Or is there anything else people would like to amend, kind of that proposal, change or add or subtract?
Sounds feasible to me.
All right, let's then open up for public comment. And I see, so raise your hand or jump into the chat when I go down kind of geographically. I see, let's start Northern California. I know Karen Glover has her hand raised. I'm not sure if you're Northern or somewhere else, but is there anyone from Northern California that wants to jump in?
Yeah, Ken from Northern California would like to jump in.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so a couple of things. One for clarification, earlier it sounded like you guys were talking about potentially using RIPA data to inform a allegation of bias when it comes to decertification. Is that accurate?
I think we were just talking about, I think Professor Raphael was asking about how that discussion was, and then whether it would be useful for us to create some kind of benchmarks or suggest making those recommendations. I think that's pretty accurate.
Well, I'm just curious. My understanding was of the RIPA data was that it was supposed to be anonymous and not accessible for those types of purposes.
Yes, I wasn't implying that, and in fact, the information is not there in the RIPA data to do it because it is anonymous.
Okay. Another thing, just for public comment, some of the stuff I heard about it being factually accurate that police are being discriminatory towards minorities per the RIPA data. I think it's worth noting that that's a little disingenuous. The RIPA data does not take into account the gender or ethnicity or race of the officers doing the stops. And it also does not take into some of those benchmarks like the demographics or the area where these stops are occurring and the crime rate and who, what people are committing the types of crimes. So I think that's a little disingenuous. I don't know how anybody else feels about that. Or if that's something that's going to be worked into the RIPA statistics at some point. Is there any plans for that?
Excuse me, this is Aisha with the Department of Justice. Thank you so much for your public comment. And this period is for the community to provide their comments, which will definitely be considered by the board and recorded in the minutes. So in order to hear everyone's comments, just know that the board members typically, don't have the capacity or the ability to engage in a back and forth. but they want to hear all of the comments and take them very, very seriously. So thank you so much.
Oh, perfect. No, thank you. I didn't realize that. I appreciate it though. Thank you.
No problem. No problem at all.
Thank you for those comments. Is there anyone else in Northern California? How about Central California? And how about Southern California?
May I jump in?
Go ahead.
Hi, folks. Thank you for all your work. I am going to be reiterating some points that have come out in the last few minutes. I'm shaking. I'm so frustrated by the conversation here. If you go back to videos of RIPA board meetings, I think I want to say 2017, 2019 from San Diego, you'll find really, really powerful public comment, because it was when the rooms were full of the community, addressing specifically post-training issues around racial profiling. There was a particular video that was rolled out for the RIPA meeting, and the community just was really aghast at how things were portrayed, and the real disconnect between how Post was presenting the issue with how the community actually lived the issue. At that point, as many folks have spoken up here about, at that point, there was a lot of feedback from the community saying, did you come and talk with us? Did you sit down with us? There were efforts. Mr. Evans, good to see you. Reached out to some folks, community members. I'm not sure where we went with any of that, but I do know that, like it's been noted in the chat.
All right. Thanks. Please.
As has been noted in the chat, we've been working on this for years now, and we're rolling over the same stuff. So that was my first point. My second point is, again, making sure that any type of reconfiguring, redoing, starting from square one, these trainings needs to have the community at the center of this. That's what RIPA really is dedicated to, right? We're dealing with the beautiful and problematic relationship of the folks who are law enforcement officers and the community, but RIPA is really about the community. So they need to be centered. My third point is this idea about, Melanie, you mentioned it, this idea about we can't make assessments of officers because we can't get into their mind, the mind of the officer. That's been rolled out for decades, for centuries, if not. And it really needs to be listened to when that's rolled out, but also move beyond, because we have now, in part thanks to RIPA, a lot of data that actually tell us the deep unjust spot that we're in with discrimination in law enforcement with our Black and brown communities in particular. My fourth point is not to dismiss the important work of the Museum of Tolerance, but like many of you, we're working with training that's 20 years old. That's stunning. That is stunning. If not a 5-year point, checking how, where's your data at 5 years out? Where's your data, at 6 years out? But 20 years out is just a stunning kind of revelation here. And one of the reasons that's so important, I'm not telling y'all anything different, but when we have had to watch, for instance, the George Floyd trial, what comes out time and time again is what training was there, what training was there, what training was there. We know when there's a use of force incident, one of the main first things that is asked, what training did the officer have, right? So this training is incredibly important. And like board member Lawanda was just remarking, is there has to be other entities that we can build upon that really centers our Black and Brown communities here. The other point is thank you, Dr. Raphael, for the Emily Owens piece. That sounds like an interesting study. I resist procedural justice because sometimes it kind of suggests if we're being nice to our community members, that's what we want to do, but it doesn't really matter how nice we are when the end result is still a discriminatory practice. And just for time's sake, and I think I have another point. Oh yeah, about the Museum of Tolerance, if I've heard right, Post is investing $1.5 million a year in them, and their training hasn't been updated in 20 years. I don't understand that. There are lots of community-based organizations that would love to have even a fraction of that money that could give you some really meaningful. The other thing I would just to end on is, I know this is very difficult work, but as someone who's been with y'all from the beginning, we heard this years ago, and I think that maybe Post is not as valued as it needs to be. And I'm saying that somewhat sarcastically because we know that this realm is incredibly important because of the questions that were asked. Sorry. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I know I saw Michelle with her hand raised, and I know, thank you, Karen. There was a lot of very useful points, but I just want to make sure that because we're so close to the end and we need to also elect committee chairs and identify next steps. So I'll just ask folks to be concise if possible. So thank you. Michelle, go ahead, please.
Great. Thank you. Yes, Karen Glover, she is a good Karen. I've never met her, but we've been watching these meetings since the beginning, and we think a lot alike. I have shared her frustration many times. Today, I feel a little more optimistic. I want to mention several things. It was Judge Lytle who took the community concerns seriously and was instrumental in getting a couple of sentences in the first annual report about the importance of community participation, not only in the classroom training, but in the development of the materials. And when we saw that video that was supposed to be used in the racial profiling course, it did astound us because it created a false equivalence between what the target of the stop is feeling and what the police officer is feeling. And that really got a lot of pushback from the community. I trust that that video was revised. Last thing I want to say is that the Museum of Tolerance's course, of course, is called Train the Trainer. So we shouldn't confuse the course that the police officers get with what the MOT, Museum of Tolerance, is teaching. It could very well be that all the criticisms of the course itself may also, generalize to the Train the Trainer. But the Train the Trainer is, of course, teaching those who are going to teach the course how to do it well. So thanks for your time, and like Karen, I appreciate your efforts and hope that they are increased with respect to the commitment that is needed to address these issues. Thanks.
Michelle, is there anyone else from Southern California?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I think it was 2 years ago. It may have been more. But it was certainly the first time that we started doing these meetings online. A person from Post who was constantly being interrupted by her gardener made excuses as to why the curriculum, in particular the videos, which videos hold that there is no such thing as racial profiling because that exists in the minds of those who complain about it, they refuse to change the videos. And here today, if I'm hearing correctly, those videos remain. Judge Lytle went beyond stating that communities should be involved. She went on to say that perhaps the videos should reflect what really happens in the street. I put it to you that we have misplaced our reliance upon Post. They do not believe in racial profiling. They've taken the position that they are agnostic to it. I put it to you, why is it that the people who are disproportionately stopped are blacks and browns? What causes that? The people who are disproportionately stopped also happen to be the people who disproportionately have no action taken with respect to the outcome of the stop. So they're stopped for some reason, and I'd like someone to articulate what that reason is. The people who complain or assert that racial profiling exists in our minds are not forthcoming with explanations.
Thank you.
I am not finished.
Well, I think we're going to have to move on because we have such a short
Well,
period of time
let
left.
me continue, please.
I'm sorry, we're going to have to move on. I appreciate that.
2.6 times
I think we're going to have to
as
move on, Mr.
the
Hilton.
basis. I understand what you're trying to do, and I'm going to continue. You need to cut me off.
I don't know. I don't have the capacity to do that. I'm sorry.
Okay. You have reported that the use of force disparity is 2.6. The number is more correctly 6.
Okay. Thank you. Is anyone else from Southern California want to speak? Okay, so I think because we do need to elect the next subcommittee chair, I'm just going to jump to that in case folks have to jump off right at noon. I wanted to nominate Ronnie Vieta actually to be co-chair, who's taken a great interest in the work that's being done here and engaging with these trainings and providing great insight into his experience around these. So if someone would second and if Ronnie would accept, I'd love to move that forward.
Board Member Lawanda, I second it.
Thank you. And Ronnie, are you willing to accept the nomination? I hope you're still on. I see you.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yeah,
Sorry,
now
it's my
great.
internet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. And is there any other nomination? Okay, I think we still vote. So I will vote yay. I don't know if you have to say our name. Let's just say our names and vote just in case this is a roll call vote. So Melanie Ochoa, yay to Ronnie as co-chair.
Lawanda Hoffman, yay for Ronnie.
Steve, I think we didn't hear you.
Sorry, Steve Raphael, yay.
Thank you. And Ronnie?
Yeah.
And I think no.
That we have a quorum. Edgar had to jump off, but with the 4 of you, we do have a quorum. So, yes.
Well, yay, welcome. And so just in the last minute, I wanted to, for the next steps, I will follow up with the board around comments to circulating the SB2 regulations. Can we vote on whether or not we would like to create a draft letter based on the points that were raised in my presentation, so that the full board can vote on it on March 30th? I'll move for drafting a letter. I think that's a proper thing with reflecting the points that I raised in the presentation.
I say yes, I say yes, draft a letter.
And then,
I'll second.
okay, great. So let's vote. Melanie, yay.
Yay.
Yay, Board Member Lawanda.
Yay for Ronnie.
Great. And I am I'm happy to start working on that. Is there someone who would like to volunteer to work with the language in that letter?
I'll work with you, Melanie.
Great. Perfect. So Steve and I will work on that the language of that letter, and we'll submit something to the board for their full approval and the March 30th meeting. For next steps, Post is also going to follow up with ways to engage on the different things around the Museum of Tolerance training once they get a little bit of additional information from Post. And I think if we're going to go forward with the factual development, perhaps we can elicit from the board members the type of information they would like to have from Post to maybe create something for them to do a report back on. Is that something that can be done via email? Someone from DOJ, if we communicate directly with you, or do we need to do that in a board meeting that's public? To identify types of things you would like to have reported back on.
The types of things you want reported back on from Post?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you all are able to send us an email, we can help connect you to the folks at Post who may be able to answer those or get answers for you from the appropriate person at Post. We would normally, address our emails to one person at Post who can then find the right person to answer, since they have, their separate divisions and sections that work on different, who work on different areas.
Okay. So we could tentatively plan to have that as a report back in a public meeting. We could identify the issues, the information we would like to know, so that Post can be prepared if they have someone to represent. Does that sound right?
Yes, you can send them to us, and then we can communicate with Post about those issues, and then figure out whether Post will present it at the board meeting or whether there some other way of relaying information to Post.
Got it. Is there anything else that I'm missing as a next step between now and, I guess, if we're going to move forward on learning domain 42, are we in agreement that we want to do that still? That was raised in the last report. Is that still that folks wanted to engage in? I see nods. Okay. What is the best next step in that? I know we did this before with a different learning domain. DOJ, can you refresh my recollection as to how that proceeded?
Hi, Melanie. This is Kendall from DOJ. With regards to LD 42, it would be our suggestion to actually focus on this Museum of Tolerance Train the Trainer course, and here's why. That Train the Trainer course addresses a 5-hour segment of the basic training, so that would be the LD 42. And so the suggestion to the board, and ultimately this is up to you, would be to focus on that Train the Trainer component, understanding it is a narrow part of all of LD 42. LD 42 kind of, as you all may have experienced with LD 3, is pretty lengthy. It's a full course chapter, but that's ultimately up to you all. But our suggestion would be to actually focus on that Train the Trainer and kind of step backwards from that into LD 42. So that's how those relate. I don't think I did a good job of explaining them earlier. They're actually very intertwined. So that might be a way to do it that would be really efficient as well.
And then, so if I understand correctly, then that means that the points that are articulated in LD 42 that connect back to this are things that should be then addressed in the Train the Trainer program. Is that correct? Or at least given a framework for how to address those specific things?
That's exactly it. So the train the trainer, it gets so confusing because there's the there's the training for the trainer, right? And then the trainers then go back and teach that at their academy. And so we're kind of looking at this backwards in the sense we're looking at the training materials provided to the trainers and seeing kind of backwards how that ultimately gets translated to the academies. I know there have been some concerns in developing the Train the Trainer that in order to do that, you have to see it taught at the academy. But it seems that there's a disconnect both with the Museum of Tolerance and POST as to what's actually being taught at the academy.
So then it might make sense as we move forward in engaging with the Train the Trainer if you can share back the piece of Learning Domain 42 that should be either directly taught in this or a framework being provided for how they would teach it so that we can see if it provides that necessary skill set as we're evaluating the course itself.
We can certainly do that, and we've also provided the Train the Trainer materials to the board already. Of course, this is the curriculum that's being updated, but this is the materials we've been referring to that are 20 years old and still being used in the academy. So you all should have those as well. It is not a copy of the videos. We haven't been able to provide those to folks.
Right, thank you. Is there anything else that I'm missing for next steps that anyone else would like to add from the board or DOJ?
I have a question. She said it stops with the trainer. It's the trainers, then they go to the academy to train. I want to know, can we go to the academy and see what they're training from once they've been trained to see how it's being portrayed to the new enlisted officers?
Well, Lawanda, you raised an interesting point, and this is something that came up several times during the course development with the board members as well, is it appears, and we use this metaphor, it seemed to land with a lot of folks, both with the Museum of Tolerance and POST, is we're being asked to design a playbook, and no one has actually seen in real life whether it scores touchdowns. And by that, I also mean POST has not seen this, and the Museum of Tolerance has not seen this. So, Lawanda, I think you raise an excellent point, which is we're being asked to create a playbook, but we know some of the classic plays do well, right? But sometimes they change over time. And so I think you raise an excellent point. And maybe that's something we put to POST, considering they are the certifying agency for all academies. So I anticipate what POST will say is, right, it's up to the academies to ultimately do these trainings, but POST is the one who certifies it. So ultimately that does fall on POST. So I put it in your hands of how you want to tackle it, but I think it's important that we keep that in mind. And board member, I really appreciate you raising that.
Hey, Lawanda, this is Nancy. Thank you, Kendall. I think that you raise a really good point about, we're creating this train the trainer training. It'd be good to have, before to get the input from the academies. But we can, Lawanda, we can try to reach out to different academies when they are doing the trainings after it is implemented and ask that, board members come and sit through those academies. Some of the board members have done that in the past, and Kendall actually went to, I don't know, Kendall, was that the CHP Academy training on one? And so we can make arrangements with individual agencies for you all to, sit in and watch those.
Thank you, Nancy. I saw Allison jump on. I don't know if you had something else you wanted to add.
Oh, I just wanted to first say, when you all are emailing us, if you do have questions for post, please just email DOJ just to avoid Bagley-Keene issues, and, not email the whole subcommittee. But, we can obviously relay any information we find out to the full subcommittee once we find that out from post. So just wanted to make sure of that, and we'll review Bagley-Keene since there's a lot of new folks too. We'll do a brief overview at the full board meeting of that as well. We also just wanted to acknowledge, unfortunately, Edgar had to jump off the meeting. This was his last post meeting, but he will be at the Stop Data meeting this Thursday. So also wanted to let everyone know. Stop Data meeting is happening this Thursday, the 10th, from 3 to 5 p.m. So we'll say our farewells to Edgar then, but we've already told him we're going to keeping him in contact with us about some of the issues that he's very knowledgeable about. And just a reminder to everybody that the full board meeting will be March 30th at 10:30 a.m. And that will be a virtual meeting just like this one. That's all I wanted to remind you all of. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry for putting everyone over and maybe not having as much time for conversation and public comment as we wanted. But thank you for your patience with me, and I promise to do better next time. And Ronnie actually can make sure of it as co-chair. So thank you all. Unless there's any last thing, no? All right, thank you. I'll see you at the board meeting.
Everyone.